Alpha of a Yellow Sun is a novel by Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Published in 2006 by Fourth Estate in London, the novel tells the story of the Biafran War II through the perspective of the characters Olana, Ugwu, and Richard. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie (Chimamanda T. EIA, born 15 September 1977, is a Nigerian writer, novelist, poet, essayist, and playwright of postcolonial feminist literature. Her debut novel, Purple Hibiscus 2003, was centered on the Nigerian Civil War and has been translated into many languages. After Purple Hibiscus were the novels Half of a Yellow Sunday 2006 and Americana 2013. Her other works include the book essays We Should All Be Feminists 2014, Dear Igwell, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions 2017, a memoir tribute to her father, Notes on Grief 2021, and a children's book, Mama's Sleeping Scarf 2023. The novel takes place in Nigeria prior to and during the Nigerian Civil War 1967–70. The effect of the war is shown through the relationships of 5 people's lives, including the twin daughters of an influential businessman, a professor, a British expat, and a Nigerian houseboy. After Biafra's declaration of secession, the lives of the main characters drastically change and are torn apart by the brutality of the Civil War and decisions in their personal lives. The book jumps between events that took place during the early and late 1960s, when the war took place, and extends until the end of the war. In the early 1960s, the main characters are introduced. Ugwu, a 13-year-old village boy who moves in with Odenigbo to work as his houseboy. Odenigbo frequently entertains intellectuals to discuss the political turmoil in Nigeria. Life changes for Ugwu when Odenigbo's girlfriend, Olana, moves in with them. Ugwu forms a strong bond with both of them, and is a very loyal houseboy. Olana has a twin sister, Kanan, a woman with a dry sense of humor, tired by the pompous company she runs for her father. Her lover Richard is an English writer who goes to Nigeria to explore Igbo Ukwu art. Jumping 4 years ahead, trouble is brewing between the Hausa and the Igbo people, and hundreds of people die in massacres, including Olana's beloved auntie and uncle. A new republic, called Biafra, is created by the Igbo. As a result of the conflict, Olana, Odenigbo, their young daughter, whom they refer to only as Baby, and Ugwu are forced to flee Nsukka, which is the university town and the major intellectual hub of the new nation. They finally end up in the refugee town of Umuahia, where they suffer and struggle due to food shortages, the constant air raids, and the environment of paranoia. There are also allusions to a conflict between Olana and Kanan, Richard and Kanan, and between Olana and Odenigbo. When the novel jumps back to the early 1960s, we learn that Odenigbo has slept with a village girl, Amala, who then has his baby. Olana is furious at his betrayal, and sleeps with Richard in a moment of liberation. She goes back to Odenigbo, and when they later learn that Amala refused to keep her newborn daughter, Olana decides that they would keep her. During the war, Olana, Odenigbo, Baby, and Ugwu live with Kanan and Richard, where Kanan was running a refugee camp. Their situation is hopeless, as they have no food nor medicine. Kanan decides to trade across enemy lines, but does not return, even after the end of the war a few weeks later. The book ends ambiguously, with the reader not knowing if Kanan lives. Characters. Ugwu. The novel starts and ends with Ugwu. He is a village boy from Opi who later becomes a servant in Odenigbo's house. Under Odenigbo and Olana's guidance, Ugwu is able to continue his education and his literary skills progress throughout the novel. 3. He tries to maintain contact with his mother and sister, Annalika, back in his home village, and is constantly looking out for his mother's health and well-being. His free time is often dominated by his love interests, which include Nasinachi, Ibareki, and Shinyari. His life is violently interrupted when he is forcibly conscripted into the Biafran Army. There, he witnesses and participates in gruesome battles and a rape he was pressured into committing. Odenigbo starts the novel as professor of mathematics at Nsukka University. His strong opinions result in some characters labeling him as a revolutionary. He favors socialism and tribalism to capitalism and Pan-Africanism or nationalism. After the war forces him to vacate his position at Nsukka University, Odenigbo becomes active in the war cause under Manpower Directorate. His personal life is dominated by his relationship and later marriage to Olana. He is the father of Baby, though Amala, not Olana, is Baby's biological mother. Odenigbo also has a strong, albeit turbulent, relationship with his mother. Mama, affects his relationship with Olana, and Mama's death starts Odenigbo down a path of alcoholism and depression. Olana is one of 3 characters through which the novel is told. She is the daughter of Chief Ozobia and twin of Canaan. Olana was raised in Nigeria, and later attended university in the United Kingdom. She is described as illogically beautiful, and her appearance often dictates how others treat her. For example, her parents try to offer sex with her as a bribe to help secure business deals. Consequently, her connection with her parents is weak and she gravitates towards her Aunt Ifka and Uncle Mabayazi in Kano. Muhammad is her ex-boyfriend and Odenigbo is her husband, and she is the adopted mother of baby. Professionally, she is a professor of sociology at Nsukka University before the war begins. She later works as a school teacher in Umuahia and finally helps her sister care for refugees in ORLU. Canaan, Olana's twin, seems to be at first very different from Olana. She is the type of strong-headed woman, independent, cold, very calculated. Canaan lives in Port Harcourt, where she runs her father's business. Her father, very proud of her, tells one of his friends that she is not just like a son, she is like two. In the beginning of the war, she is a war profiteer. However, after she witnesses the war's cruelty, she changes completely as a character and instead of running her father's business, she runs a refugee camp. She remains fearless and in the end decides to trade with the enemy, putting her life at risk. Richard Churchill Richard is an English writer who comes to Nigeria to explore Igbo Ukwu art. At first he associates with other expats, especially Susan who becomes his girlfriend. However, once he meets Canaan at one of the parties Susan drags him to, he becomes fascinated with her. Richard moves to Nsukka where he teaches at the Nsukka University and attempts to write a book about the Igbo Ukwu art. Olana invites him to be part of Odenigbo's circle of intellectuals. Richard is glad to witness Biafra's birth, thinking it would actually make him Biafran. He starts writing a book about the war, but soon realizes that it is not his story to tell. Adichie has said in an interview that the idea of Richard came from Frederick Forsyth, a staunch supporter of Biafra. Richard isn't at all like him, of course, but just the sense of an Englishman who became more Biafran than Biafrans themselves, was really an idea that came from him, Forsyth. 4. Ugwu's anti-cleaner at Nsukka University, she introduces Ugwu to Master Odenigbo. Annalika is Ugwu's sister. She is preparing to get married before the war, but a wartime tragedy changes her plans. Nsinachi Ugwu's first crush from his village of Opi. Ugwu and Nsinachi reconnect after the war. Ugwu's mother suffers from illness in Ugwu's home village of Opi. She seeks treatment in Nsukka with Odenigbo's help. Ugwu often worries about her during the war. Miss Adebayo Yoruba professor at Nsukka University. Sexual tension between Miss Adebayo and Odenigbo create an awkward relationship between Miss Adebayo and Olana. As the war starts to break out, Miss Adebayo's ethnicity creates a gap between her and other professors. Dr. Patel Indian professor at Nsukka University. Dr. Patel is a friend of Odenigbo and Olana. Professor Lehman American professor at Nsukka University. Professor Lehman's views are often criticized by Odenigbo. Professor Ezeka professor at Nsukka University who later becomes director of mobilization in the Biafran Army. Okioma a friend of Olana and Odenigbo in Nsukka. Okioma is a renowned poet, at one point called, the voice of our generation. He cites Olana as his inspiration. Okioma later becomes an officer in the Biafran Army and stops writing poems. Edna Olana's neighbor in Nsukka. Edna is an African-American woman with strong opinions on racial and gender injustice. Jomo works as the gardener at both Richard's house and Odenigbo's house in Nsukka. He is one of Ugwu's first friends in Nsukka and is also often feuding with his rival, Harrison. Harrison Richard's houseboy. Harrison's talkative nature at first annoys Richard, and later gets him into trouble. Shinyari works in a house near Masters in Nsukka. Maintains late-night visits with Ugwu until the war starts. Mama Odenigbo's mother, a village woman from Aba. She is opposed to the relationship between Odenigbo and Olana because they are not officially married, no bride price paid yet, plus Olana is an unnatural woman. Amala a village girl who works for Mama, Odenigbo's mother. To break up Olana and Odenigbo, Mama makes Amala sleep with Odenigbo. Amala gets pregnant but after giving birth, she refuses to take the child and sends her back to Mama. Chief Okanji friend of Olana and Canaan's parents. Chief Okanji claims a romantic interest in Olana, but is thoroughly rebuffed by Olana. Chief Ozobia, a prominent businessman in Lagos and father to Olana and Canaan. Chief Ozobia manipulates his daughters for financial benefit. He also keeps a mistress, and eventually leaves Nigeria during the war. Olana and Canaan's mother, Chief Ozobia's wife and mother of Olana and Canaan. She does not have a strong relationship with her daughters, and her marriage with Chief Ozobi might be described as a pretense. Uncle Mabayazi, Olana's uncle, he is the brother of Olana's mother. He lives with his family in Kano, where he founded the Igbo Union Grammar School. Auntie Ifka, Uncle Mabayazi's wife. Auntie Ifka gives guidance to Olana, who isn't very close to her own mother. Arise, Olana's cousin, she is Uncle Mabayazi and Auntie Ifka's daughter. Arise is eager to find a husband and get married. Like her parents, she looks up to Olana. Muhammad, Olana's ex-boyfriend, he is a handsome Hausa man. Even after she leaves him for Odenigbo, they remain on good terms and she frequently visits him until the war starts. During the war, he writes her letters but they feel very distanced. Baby Olana and Odenigbo's daughter. Amala is baby's birth mother, but refuses to keep her. When Olana sees her, she decides to adopt her. Baby's real name is Chiamaka, which means, God is beautiful. Canaan picked it but it is rarely used. Susan Grenville Pitt's initially Richard's girlfriend. She lives in Nigeria but mainly associates with other expatriates or upper-class Nigerians. Her racism towards Nigerians as well as her possessiveness towards Richard emerge periodically throughout the novel. Major Madu, lifelong friend of Canaan. Major Madu serves in first the Nigerian army and later in the Biafran Army. He and Richard's relationship is strained due to the uncertainty of Madu's role in Canaan's life. Special Julius, army contractor. He becomes a frequent visitor of Odenigbo when they are in Umuahia. Ekwenugo, member of the science group in the Biafran Army. Ekwenugo meets Olana and Odenigbo in Umuahia. Mrs. Muokolu, company teacher with Olana at Umuahia. Olana finds Mrs. Muokolu is manly and slightly judgmental. Mrs. Muokolu eventually stops teaching and starts trading across enemy lines. Okoromadu, an old acquaintance of Olana's, Okoromadu helps her get emergency supplies for baby in Umuahia. Ibareki, Ugwu's love interest in Umuahia. Ibareki is exploited for her parents' benefit. Alice, Odenigbo and Olana's neighbor at their second place of residence in Umuahia. Alice seeks refuge in Umuahia after being tricked by an army colonel. She is known as a recluse and avid pianist. Mystery shrouds her relationship with Odenigbo. Father Marcel helps coordinate refugee relief with Canaan in ORLU. Father Marcel is later accused of impropriety by some of the refugees. High-Tech, a young soldier and leader of Ugwu's reconnaissance unit. High-Tech's name refers to his commanders claiming he is more useful than a high-technology spying gadget. Themes. War. Edit. The Nigerian Civil War, or the Nigerian Biafran War, started on 6 July 1967 and ended on 13 January 1970. The war broke out due to political and ethnic struggles, partly caused by the numerous attempts of the southeastern provinces of Nigeria to secede and form the Republic of Biafra. Political conflict between the Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa and Fulani people erupted into two deadly military coups. The Igbo tried to break away from Nigeria to become the Republic of Biafra, but were met with little support. From 1968 onward, the war fell into a form of deadlock, with Nigerian forces unable to make significant advances into the remaining areas of Biafran control. The Nigerian government cut off humanitarian aid to Biafra, resulting in hundreds of thousands of civilians dying from starvation and disease. Many lives and resources were lost during the war, including Adichie's grandfathers, and even today there are still tensions between the different ethnic and religious groups of Nigeria. 3.6. The story in Half of a Yellow Sun centers on the war. Adichie grew up in the aftermath of the war. The need to write about it came from growing up in its shadow. This thing that I didn't quite understand was my legacy. It hovered over everything. 6. She has stated she believes that many of the issues that caused the war remain today. She further commented that the war is talked about, in uninformed and unimaginative ways, and that the war is as important to the Igbo people her book features today as it was then. 7. Because none of the major political events were changed in the book, Adichie said that the book contained emotional truth, and that the book showed the war had a significant impact upon the people of Nigeria. 7. Politics and identity in post-colonial Africa. The social gatherings at Odenigbo's house are full of debates on Africa's political future. Here, the usefulness of various forms of African governance are discussed amongst the Nigerian intelligentsia. One particularly noteworthy debate involves Odenigbo defending the tribe as the ideal unit for African, as other characters stress the need for Pan-Africanism or nationalism. He is quoted as proclaiming, "The only authentic identity for the African is the tribe. I am Nigerian because a white man created Nigeria and gave me that identity. I am black because the white man constructed black to be as different as possible from his white. But I was Igbo before the white man came." Role of Westerners in post-colonial Africa. Edit. Although there is a clear reference to Western influence in the Biafran War, a more subtle examination is found in Richard's character. Richard, although with good intentions, tries too hard to be part of first Nigeria, and later Biafra. His fascination with the culture and his wish to be part of Biafra leads to him speaking for Biafrans by attempting to write 2 novels, one about the art, and the second one about the Biafran War. Richard is unable to complete either, and concludes that these are not his stories to tell. However, he is effective when he writes about the war for the Western press, which actually helps Biafra's cause. Adichie herself has said in an interview, that, maybe, Richard's character, is my subtle way of slipping in my politics, that maybe it's time that African wrote about Africa. 4. Relevance of academia in everyday life. Many of the main characters in Half of a Yellow Sun are professors, including Olana and Odenigbo. Odenigbo regularly hosts fellow professors from Nsukka University for political discussions on the weekends. Over the course of the novel, Half of a Yellow Sun seems to criticize both these professors and their opinions. It does this by juxtaposing the high-minded political opinions of Odenigbo and his companions from the early 60s sections against the political realities of the late 60s sections. The novel also uses the same professors from the early 60s sections and puts them in the late 60s sections. Also, Kanan's business mind helps her successfully run a refugee camp, whereas Olana and Odenigbo seem ineffectual. Adichie seems to emphasize the reality of action over the ephemeral nature of opinion. Modus operandi of Western journalism. Edit. Half of a Yellow Sun is heavily critical of the Western media's coverage of the Biafran War. The rule of Western journalism is obvious when Richard meets with the foreign journalists. Richard exhaled. It was like somebody sprinkling pepper on his wound. Thousands of Biafrans were dead, and this man wanted to know if there was anything new about one dead white man. Richard would write about this, the rule of Western journalism: 100 dead black people equal 1 dead white person. Since it is clear that white journalists have a greater influence, Madhu asks Richard to write about the war for the Western press. They will take what you write more seriously because you are white. If you really want to contribute, this is the way that you can. The world has to know the truth of what is happening, because they simply cannot remain silent while we die. Women empowerment. Edit. Although Half of a Yellow Sun does not have the conflict between a woman and patriarchy typical of feminist novels, it does show the agency of women. In one of the pivotal moments, Olana is disappointed by Odenigbo's betrayal and goes to Kano to seek comfort from her family there. Auntie Ifka says, "You must never behave as if your life belongs to a man. Your life belongs to you and you alone." Later on, even after forgiving Odenigbo, she confronts him about his betrayal and does not accept him justifying his actions by blaming his mother. On the other hand, when Olana's father cheats on her mother, Olana's mother does not confront him about it. She only asks Olana to tell her father to do it more subtly. Marriage. Edit. Marriage is a recurrent theme in Half of a Yellow Sun. For the most part of the novel, Olana and Kanan both live with men without it being question of marriage. Olana refuses to get married many times at first, fearing that marriage would flatten their bond to a prosaic partnership. It is only during the war, when Odenigbo is invited to a town meeting in Aba and Olana is not, that they talk again about marriage. Olana accepts, but the wedding is done hastily and is interrupted by an air raid. Although Richard never asks Kanan to marry him, he does mention his wish for her to be his wife many times. Arise, who is poor and uneducated, admires Olana for postponing marriage but waits eagerly for a husband herself. It is only women that know too much book like you who can say that, sister. If people like me who don't know book wait too long, we will expire. Adichie seems to be saying that marriage is a pragmatic choice and women who don't need to get married might choose not to even when their boyfriends are willing. https://en.wiki.org/wiki/half_of_a_yellow_sun #text=% 20% to 0 subtly. Marriage, Married %20 might %20 choose %20 not %20 to %20 even %20 when %2 owe their %20 boyfriends %20 or %20 willing. Reception. Half of A Yellow Sun takes place in Nigeria in the 1960s. The book begins when Ugwu, an Igbo boy from a bush village, goes to Nsukka to work as a houseboy for Odenigbo, a professor and radical. Odenigbo is in love with Olana, the beautiful daughter of a wealthy Nigerian. Olana moves in with Odenigbo and meets his friends, who argue about politics every night. Ugwu becomes an excellent cook and goes to school. Meanwhile Richard, a white Englishman in Nigeria, leaves his girlfriend Susan when he falls in love with Kanan, Olana's sardonic twin sister. Richard moves to Nsukka and befriends Odenigbo and Olana. Odenigbo's mother, Mama, visits and calls Olana a witch, which upsets her greatly. Olana and Odenigbo start trying to have a child. The narrative jumps a few years ahead, when the Nigerian government is overthrown. The Northern Hausa blame the Igbo for the coup. There is then another coup, and this time many Igbo soldiers are killed. Olana now has a child she calls Baby, and she takes her to Kano to visit her relatives. The violence against the Igbo becomes a pogrom, and Olana's relatives are brutally murdered. She escapes on a train to Nsukka and sees a woman carrying her daughter's severed head in a basket. Meanwhile Richard watches Igbo civilians being murdered at the airport. Colonel Ojukwu, the Igbo leader, announces that southeast Nigeria will secede and become the Republic of Biafra. All the characters are overjoyed at this. Nigeria then declares war on Biafra to annex it. Britain and Russia supply arms to the Nigerians, who advance against the confident Biafrans. Nsukka is evacuated, and Olana, Odenigbo, Ugwu, and Baby move to the cities of Aba and then Umuahia. Their living situations get progressively worse as the war continues and Biafra's food and money runs out. Odenigbo and Olana get married, but there is an air raid during the reception. The narrative is sometimes interrupted by a book called The World Was Silent When We Died, where an unknown author describes the larger political forces at work in the war. The story returns to the early 60s, to the time before the war. Olana goes to London, and while she is away Mama visits Odenigbo with a girl named Amala. Odenigbo sleeps with Amala, and when Olana returns home she finds out. She moves out and gets very depressed. Olana learns that Amala is pregnant with Odenigbo's child. She gets drunk one night and seduces Richard. Richard and Olana both agree not to tell Kanan, though Olana soon tells Odenigbo. Olana and Odenigbo get back together. Olana decides to adopt as her own Amala's child, which is a girl and unwanted by Amala and Mama. Olana names the child Chiamaka but calls her Baby. Kanan then finds out about Olana and Richard, and she stops speaking to Olana. She burns the manuscript Richard was writing but doesn't leave him. The story returns to the late 60s. The situation in war-torn Biafra rapidly declines, and there is starvation and violence everywhere. Nigeria blockades all aid to Biafra, and most foreign countries ignore the conflict. Richard starts writing articles about the suffering Biafrans, and Kanan runs a refugee camp. Odenigbo's mother is killed, and he gets depressed and starts drinking. Kanan finds Olana and, her perspective changed by the war, forgives her. The sisters grow close again. Ugwu falls in love with a girl named Ibareki, but then he is forcefully conscripted into the army. He fights some battles and then takes part in the gang rape of a bar girl. He is badly wounded in a subsequent battle, and everyone thinks he is dead. Umuahia falls to the Nigerians and Olana's family moves in with Kanan. They find Ugwu in a hospital and take him home. Children start regularly dying of kwashiorkor, a disease of starvation and malnutrition. One day Kanan crosses enemy lines to find food if possible, and doesn't return. Richard and Olana search for her frantically but find nothing. Finally Biafra surrenders and Nigeria is reunified. Olana's family returns to Nsukka to find their house looted and all their savings liquidated. Ugwu returns to his village and learns that his sister was gang raped by soldiers. He starts writing about his experiences, and it is revealed that he is the author of The World Was Silent When We Died. Kanan's disappearance remains a mystery. Half of A Yellow Sun. Summary. Half of A Yellow Sun begins in the early 1960s with a Nigerian teenage boy named Ugwu taking a job as a houseboy for prominent academic and professor, Odenigbo. Odenigbo is in love with Olana, a local girl who comes from a wealthy family. They fall in love, and Olana moves in with Odenigbo and Ugwu. The three become very close. Ugwu serves the couple well and becomes very dedicated to them. He also receives an education while living with them. The other central characters in the text are Richard and Kanan. Kanan is Olana's sarcastic and opinionated twin sister, and Richard is a British writer who is in Nigeria to study Nigerian art. Richard pursues Kanan, and they begin a relationship together. The narrative now jumps ahead to the late 1960s to the historical conflict that Half of a Yellow Sun revolves around, the Nigerian Civil War 1967. 1970. There has been extensive political instability in Nigeria for some time, and in the late 1960s, it finally bubbles over. The Nigerian Civil War, sometimes known as the Biafran War, lasted from 1967 until 1970. It began after the Igbo people seceded from Nigeria and declared their own state of Biafra. This was due to extreme ethnically charged violence that had been directed towards the Igbo community. Many Igbo people felt they did not belong in Nigeria. The civil war was brutal, leading to many lost lives and creating many refugees. Biafra finally surrendered in 1970 and was absorbed back into Nigeria. The Igbo people, a particular Nigerian tribe, secede from the rest of the nation, calling their new country Biafra. All the characters are happy at this development because there has been significant violence towards the Igbo people since a recent coup against the Nigerian government took place. The government then declares war against Biafra and receives significant military support from both Britain and Russia. A coup is when a single group tries to take power by force from a ruling government. A personal level, Odenigbo and Olana now have a child together that they refer to only as baby. They also get married sometime after. Due to the conflict, Odenigbo, Olana, and baby are forced to move to the refugee town of Umuahia. The war causes food shortages and serious difficulties in the new country of Biafra. There are also interpersonal conflicts between all the central characters due to the immense stresses of war. There is even an air raid during Odenigbo and Olana's wedding reception. War creeps into every aspect of life in Half of a Yellow Sun. The narrative has another time jump, now moving back to the early 1960s. While Olana is out of the country, Odenigbo's mother visits him with a young girl named Amala. Odenigbo finds himself attracted to Amala and sleeps with her, cheating on Olana. Olana discovers this when she returns home. She is completely devastated and moves out of the home she shares with Odenigbo. Upon finding out that Amala is pregnant with Odenigbo's child, Olana is pushed into an even deeper depression. In a state of drunken desperation, she seduces Richard and sleeps with him. Olana confesses her infidelity to Odenigbo, and the two end up getting back together. Amala decides she does not want to keep her baby, so Olana agrees to raise it as her own. This is baby, who is referred to earlier in the text. Initially, Richard keeps his disloyalty to Kanan a secret, but she eventually finds out. While she does not leave Richard, Kanan is furious and cuts off contact with her sister. Once again, Half of a Yellow Sun moves forward chronologically to the late 1960s. The situation in Biafra has become dire. Food and supplies are incredibly low, and other countries are ignoring the war, leaving Biafra with no foreign aid. To help the war effort, Kanan is running a refugee camp. She also finds herself changed by the drastic circumstances of the war and forgives Olana. Ugwu, on the other hand, is forced into the Biafran military. He sees many atrocities and participates in them too. Disturbingly, he even takes part in the gang rape of a woman. The other central characters believe Ugwu is dead until they find him in a hospital. Umuahia falls to the Nigerian army, and Olana and Odenigbo move in with Kanan and Richard. It is clear to all involved that Biafra is badly losing the war and it appears that it will not last much longer. One day, Kanan crosses over to Nigeria to try to get supplies. She never returns. Despite Richard and Olana's desperate searching, Kanan is never seen again. The war finally ends, and Odenigbo and Olana return to their hometown to find their house destroyed. They have lost many family members to the conflict but begin to plan how to rebuild their lives. Ugwu writes a book about his experiences in the Biafran War, The World Was Silent When We Died. This book has been sporadically quoted throughout Half a Yellow Sun without reference to its author. The genres in Half of a Yellow Sun. Half of a Yellow Sun is a multifaceted and detailed text that explores how conflict impacts both a country and the people within it. Below are the genres that Adichie's novel fits under. Half of a Yellow Sun, postcolonialism. Half of a Yellow Sun is a postcolonial text. Postcolonialism explores the cultural, social, and economic legacies left behind in a formerly colonized country. The impacts of colonization can haunt nations for decades and centuries to come. The theory rose to prevalence in the 20th century as many nations that had once been occupied and colonized by powerful Western nations, like Britain and France, began to gain independence. Postcolonial novels explore these concepts through fictional characters, typically tying in real events. Famous postcolonial novels include Midnight's Children, 1981, by Salman Rushdie, and Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, 1958. Half of a Yellow Sun details the horrors and atrocities committed during the Nigerian Civil War. This places Adichie's novel in the canon of postcolonial literature, as many historians partly attribute the breakout of the Nigerian Civil War to Britain, Nigeria's former colonizer. Nigeria gained independence from Britain in 1960, but Britain decided where the borders of Nigeria would fall. This was done by British officials with little to no knowledge of the nuances of Nigerian internal politics. Tribes who were fundamentally opposed to each other were lumped in together by these borders, leading to the instability and conflict that caused the Civil War. Chimamanda Adichie's second book, Half of a Yellow Sun, is set during the Nigerian Civil War that tragically occurred in her home country during the 1960s. The story masterfully revolves around an intricate web of shifting viewpoints, each of which centers around one of the novel's 5 main characters: Ugwu, Odenigbo, Olana, Canaan, and Richard. All of these characters find themselves affiliated with the Biafran rebels of the war, and this affiliation eventually has consequences for all of the novel's principal characters. Ugwu becomes a houseboy for the Nsukka University professor Odenigbo and serves him faithfully as the teacher builds a family. Odenigbo marries Olana, and the two eventually have a child whom they simply refer to as Baby. Olana's sister Canaan falls in love with Richard Churchill, a British writer who is sincerely interested in Nigerian culture and has come to the nation to write a book about its ancient art. As Biafra's secession from Nigeria is announced, the 5 main characters of the novel are initially extremely optimistic regarding their new nation's future. But after Nigeria declares war on Biafra to reclaim its former territory, it steadily becomes apparent that the rebels have bitten off more than they can chew. Massacres of innocent civilians begin to amount increasingly on both sides of the conflict, and starvation and malnutrition ensue on a massive scale. As time goes on, the Biafrans fare worse and worse during the conflict, and the characters' personal lives do too. Odenigbo cheats on Olana with Amala, and Olana cheats on Odenigbo with Richard, which consequently means that Richard cheats on Canaan as well. Ugwu is kidnapped by Biafran soldiers and forced into the military, where he ultimately participates in murder and rape. The tensions amongst themselves eventually begin to heal, and things become more and more normal even as the Biafrans are obviously losing the war. The war comes to a close, and the main characters attempt to come to grips with Biafra's failure. Canaan visits Nigeria one day to collect supplies, and she never returns from the trip. Richard searches for her frantically, but he eventually comes to the conclusion that he will never see her again. Odenigbo attempts to pick up the pieces of his former academic life, while Olana consoles herself by taking solace in the fact that she will see her sister in the next life. In conclusion, Ugwu writes The world was silent when we died, a textual account of Biafran experiences during the war.